Hello, my name's Jack Stanley, and nice to talk to you again here on YouTube. And I talk a lot about sound recording and sound recording history and the like. It has been something I have been interested in since I was a child. And it's interesting what gets us to start things off. What gets us interested in recordings anyway? What is that deciding moment that changes things that maybe affect you for the rest of your life? Wanting to record or capture or collect pioneer recordings. It's obviously not for the audio quality. There's something much more to it. It's touching a piece of history, touching time. I think each and every one of us probably has a unique story of how we first got interested in the whole idea of collecting records. Many of us of a certain age, records were not an unusual thing. They were around everywhere. When I was a very, very small boy, I had a 78 RPM player to play my kiddie records. My kiddie records were mainly all 78. And then some were 16 and occasionally 33. But that was just records. I didn't really think anything of them as being anything special because records were everywhere. My parents had records. My grandparents had records. They had 45s or 33s and 78. So there was nothing odd or unusual about it. But something happened, at least for myself. Several things happened. In 1964, I took a school trip to the Thomas Edison uh, laboratory and factory complex. It was still a factory at that time, which is very interesting because I remember seeing smoke coming from chimneys and hearing the whistles blow and stuff like that. It was really quite fascinating. But it was in what I can say now is building number one that you would walk in, and the entire wall of the building was filled with various artifacts, all sitting there. I mean, basically, the whole history of Edison was sitting there on these shelves. It wasn't ornate or anything. It was very simple, just basically right there in your face. And in there was an old gent who had worked for the old man, and he put on a diamond disc record. I'd never heard one. I'd never heard an old style record before. And I guess at that instant, I guess at that moment, I was incurably hooked and fascinated with sound recording. Now you got to remember, this was 1964 going into 1965. Um, they had just stopped making 78 records in India and the like. Um, so they were not unusual, but records from the 1920s seem so distant. Although, if you think about it, in today's world, if we want to look at it the same way, it's like saying records from the 1970s are so unique and unusual. It seems much closer. I don't know why, but at the time, the 1920s seemed ages back. Maybe as we get older, we don't look at things the same way. But that was in my mind, yes, that initial visit, and it kind of went back into a special place in the brain and was never looked at again, at least until an incident occurred that would change my life forever. It was in school. I had lived up in the metropolitan New York area for much of my life and visited places. I had some pictures of Washington's headquarters which was in Morristown, New Jersey. And I had them, and I happened to bring them into school. We did show and tell. I don't know if we do that much in school anymore, but it was a fun thing to do every day. We do a little bit of that, talk about what we've done, and share stuff. And so I brought in pictures of Washington's headquarters that I had been at. And I thought it was interesting, and obviously some people in the class thought it was interesting, which I'll get to in a moment. However, one of the kids came up and started talking about their fishing trip over the weekend. And their fishing trip, I was living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at the time, 1969. And this young fella in class, he said, my father and I went fishing, and we were fishing in Port Everglades. Port Everglades was a lot different in 1969 than it is today. And he said we were fishing, and we caught on a hook a record. And he said it's an old type of record, a very strange type of record. And he held the record up. And I was just mesmerized. All of a sudden, that memory from 1964 came back. And so I wanted to see that record, and we played it. And it was dreadful singing. It was a barbershop quartet that perhaps had seen better days, or perhaps they had had one too many, and they made a record, and it was pretty bad singing, and they were off key, and here, there, and everywhere. But I was just beside myself. Well, the end result is I went to this kid whose name I can't remember anymore, and I said, I'll trade you my pictures of Washington's headquarters for your record. And he said, great. He was more interested in Washington's headquarters, and I was obviously far more interested in that record. I have to say that this is the record that started this obsession, this path that I've taken in my life to study the history of sound recording as extensively as I have. I still have it. It is worthless. It is a piece of junk. But it is the Rosetta Stone as to who I am. And although it sounds as bad as it once did, it's here. This is the record that started it all. It's just a tin um, based acetate record. Nothing special. But my goodness, what a reaction this record